Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Somewhat Scholarly. My name is Alan Hibbard, and today I am speaking with a gentleman who is running for President of the United States. Please welcome back to the channel, Aaron Day. Aaron, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm doing great. Glad we could connect. So it's been like 2 years, I think, since we talked, plus minus.
Yep.
The world has gotten even crazier, post COVID and everything else. We have some banks falling apart this last week. The world is nuts, Russia, Ukraine. Where is your mind right now? Like, how are you seeing the world? How are you seeing the United States? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it has been interesting. I think we were talking about banks 2 years ago. And what actually motivated me to decide to actually run for office was I'd been involved in politics, a political activist for about a decade after I had a successful company crushed by the Department of Justice, Obamacare, and Dodd-Frank. So that's what really got me into political activism. It's what got me into New Hampshire. And then after being in politics, I'm like, this is a lost cause. I mean, it's completely corrupt and it's breaking down systemically. I mean, we kind of joke about the fact that we still have this Epstein list that has politically connected people on it. Nothing has come of that. And so we have really a complete lack of faith and trust and integrity in government. So my approach was, I'm just going to focus entirely on crypto. And I've been involved in crypto since 2012, but I really got involved in it full time and really was focusing my efforts on Ravencoin. And then what I noticed happening was you're seeing an incredible crackdown on crypto. So my whole view on this was forget politics. Let's just move into a peer-to-peer world where we're operating without third parties. That was my goal. And then I saw the universe just collapsing around us. And I think we talked about this before, but New Hampshire is really a pioneer for crypto. I'm part of the Free State Project here in New Hampshire, which is a movement to get 20,000 people to move to the state of New Hampshire so that we can achieve liberty in our lifetime in one geographic area. And I learned about Bitcoin in 2012 from a radio station called Free Talk Live. And in fact, it's run by Free Staters. Ian Freeman and Mark Edge have been doing this liberty-oriented radio show that is now syndicated across the country. Well, it turns out they learned about crypto really early. They're the ones who introduced Roger Ver to crypto and to Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin Jesus literally learned about it from the Free State Project and from Free Talk Live. But Ian Freeman, who, in addition to Free Talk Live, set up a bunch of Bitcoin ATMs around New Hampshire, and he was basically set up by the FBI. They trumped up a whole bunch of charges around money laundering and money transmission laws and everything else. He's now facing 8 years in jail. He just got done with a major lawsuit in federal court. And, we don't know what the final outcome is going to be, but based on what we heard, it looks like 8 years. Another Free Stater, Jeremy Kauffman, started a company called LBRY, which is also known as Odyssey. So if you've ever seen that platform for digital content, it's kind of a YouTube competitor on the blockchain. His company was just destroyed by the SEC. They claimed that his LBRY token was a security and basically went after him for all of the money that was raised. So my understanding is they've now laid off all of the employees. So New Hampshire had the highest usage of crypto per capita in the world at one point. And there are businesses all over the state that have been taking crypto for years and ATMs. So what I saw the writing on the wall, which is that the SEC, the IRS, the Treasury Department, everybody is coming after crypto. So this area that I thought might be like a safe haven or a flight to freedom is being throttled 10 different ways. So that's what prompted me to get back into politics. It was partially seeing that, but then studying what is the impetus, what's actually causing all of this to happen. And what I realized is that we really do have a situation where there's a globalist agenda. There's a broader movement going on in society, either towards centralization, complete centralization, or a move on the other hand with Bitcoin and Ravencoin towards complete decentralization. But the movement towards centralization is far more organized and has far more resources and planning behind it than I thought. So you're talking about the United Nations, you're talking about the WEF, the World Bank, Bank of International Settlements. They have a specific timetable. I think COVID was part of it. COVID was actually part of kind of a test, because a lot of what went on with COVID was the implementation of surveillance systems, contact tracing, security cameras all over the place. And the goal is to move towards CBDC. And CBDC is essentially the gateway to tyranny. So once you have a central bank digital currency where you have completely censorable money, then you can layer on top of that social credit systems, vaccine passports, UBI, and then you've essentially lost free will. So I essentially saw that that's going on at kind of a macro level. So I decided that we need to stop that. If we don't stop CBDC, we're lost. I mean, I truly believe that is the number one issue, is we have to stop CBDC and then promote at the same time peer-to-peer crypto. And so that's how I see the landscape. I see the landscape as, between now and 2030, if the globalist plan succeeds, we are going to be living under complete tyranny with a digital currency at the center of it, or we can pursue another option, which is, in my opinion, the political aspect of this. The part of my campaign isn't really elect me, I'm going to solve all your problems. No politician will ever solve anybody's problems. But my campaign is going to be launching 4 different initiatives that are centered around mass noncompliance. I'm actually publishing 4 books. My first book is going to come out in a couple of weeks. These are short books, 100, 150 pages long. But the first one is essentially about sound money. And it's going through and it's discussing, the scenario that I just described, this dystopian scenario of what happens if we get CBDC and all this other stuff. But I'm going to talk about the history of fiat. I'm going to walk through, because there's some interesting things about this. If every fiat currency in human history has failed, there have been thousands of fiat currencies. One particular individual did an analysis of 775 of fiat currencies. They all failed. The average lifespan is 27 years. And when you look at the analysis of why they failed, there's nothing different about why every other fiat currency has failed going on with the United States dollar or the fiat currencies that are in existence today. The US dollar is truly on its last legs. So we're at that point, that pivot point where I see us having a manufactured financial crisis. And then what's going to happen is, in a typical problem, reaction, solution manner, they're going to engineer a crisis, get a fear-based response, and then implement something that's far worse than the problem they themselves created. So in this particular case, we may be at the beginning of that financial collapse now, and all of a sudden they're going to say, hey, well, look, good news. We're going to take all the money that you have in the bank, and then we'll exchange it for CBDC, and this is your way out of it, or maybe we'll forgive your debt. So we have to stop this. And so, as I said, my platform is around radical noncompliance. So the book is going to also lead to a website where I'm promoting tools that people can use to learn about self-custody, crypto, gold, and silver. And so, again, this is one of 4 areas, but this is the number one focus and the number one priority, because if we lose control of having an alternative for money, none of the rest of it even matters. So there's a lot to go into there, but I just, that's setting the stage. That's kind of how I see the world and where I got to where I am right now with this campaign.
Yeah, I love it. And I can relate. I mean, obviously we have so many similar views on the monetary system and how it corrupts all the other institutions, education, healthcare, I mean, everything, you name it, media. So we definitely talked about that before. A tough thing that I struggle with is, what can I do as one man? Like, I can opt out of the monetary system. I cashed out my retirement accounts, my 401k and so forth, and pretty much everything is in Bitcoin, gold, and silver, as you mentioned. But then, like, it's really hard in terms of like healthcare and so many other things. I just feel so connected to the system. So I've been thinking about these things that it sounds like you've thought about much more. So I'm curious, what are books 2, 3, and 4? Like, what's the radical noncompliance of those other items?
Well, the second area is one that's personal to me as well. It's around healthcare. And it's not just look on the extreme view. When you really study this, public health is not here to improve your health. Public health is a part of a depopulation death cult. I mean, and I'm not. That's not an understatement. Since I last talked to you, I've lost 150 pounds since the last time we spoke. And I've struggled with weight my entire life. And I even had a healthcare company around it. And in studying, why do we have this obesity epidemic? We have a situation right now where the United States is the fattest country in the world. 80% of Americans are overweight or obese. What is it all about? And when you actually study the history of it, it's our own public health food guidelines, nutrition guidelines that are the source. If you look at the 1992 food pyramid that put carbs, 11 to 15 servings of carbs at the base, and you see an animated graph of obesity rates by state animated over time, the introduction of that food pyramid is what spiked the increase in obesity, spiked the increase in type 2 diabetes. So I would argue that this COVID crisis was manufactured, and that similarly, that public health guidelines for health and nutrition have been engineered to make us sick. I mean, you look at fertility rates as well, the chemicals that are in the food, everything about what we have been pushed to believe is the right thing to do for health is completely counter to actually having good health. So as an example, not only did I not get COVID, and my kids were sick and everything else, I didn't have a cold this winter. I mean, I actually went through the entire, winter and traveled to 17 states and everything else. And so part of this has been hacking. You can hack your own health by just changing your diet, exercise, sleep, nutrition, adding in meditation. I mean, it's not rocket science, but yet it's the exact opposite of what these so-called experts are telling you. So you can take control of 80, 90% of your health by simply ignoring public health guidelines and then actually starting to look into other areas. So I've switched to keto. I've done a lot of intermittent fasting. I actually fasted for 128 days last year. I had one sprint of 36 days. What I've learned doing all of this is our bodies work a lot different than anybody could imagine or that anybody would possibly think. Like, we've been trained, you have to rethink everything. Like there was a spiritual awakening as part of this process and everything as well. But I really have questioned everything that I've learned in my entire life. And so I examine everything like this. So if somebody says, well, you need to eat 3 meals a day, well, okay, where did that come from? Where's the peer-reviewed science that shows that you need 3 meals a day and that has anything to do with optimal health? When you dig and you find it, there isn't any. There's no justification on the basis of health for 3 meals a day. There's no data that showed that the food pyramid had anything to do with optimal health. And then you just realize, all right, I've got to start questioning everything. Including most prescription drugs are unnecessary. And we actually have a cycle where big food is putting out a product that's making us sick so that big pharma can come in and keep us sick at a kind of lower intelligence, lower energy state. That's essentially what we have going on. And that's just this one beautiful cycle going on. So what I'm going to do in the second book is kind of show what's going on with public health, how it works, where it comes from, even like the eugenics movement and how that actually has a direct impact on the public health policies and guidelines that we have today. And then I'm going to create on the website part of it, because again, this isn't just about my campaign tagline is truth and transformation. So let's expose the real truth about what's going on. And then let's work on personal transformation, because you asked, well, what can I do? Well, the truth is all any of us can do is transform ourselves. That's the only way we get out of this. But people don't have access to tools or a community to really help facilitate that kind of transformation. So I want these books and tools to help facilitate that in the areas, first, of money, second, of health. Third, I want to touch what I call exiting the matrix, which really encompasses 3 areas. 1, turning off mainstream media. 2, stop using the big censorship complex in big tech and move to decentralized censorship resistant alternatives. And 3, get your kids out of public school indoctrination centers. So that's that area. And then the last one is exposing government corruption. And I want to crowdsource exposing government corruption at the level of the federal government. And I'm going to go through and break down every federal government department. That'll be kind of a summary in the book, but then there'll be a website that you can go to where people can crowdsource information about this. Because when you really dig into and you find out what's the history of the FBI, what's the history of this organization, there hasn't really been good intention behind these organizations from day one. And most people are just not aware of it. But you can't report the FBI to themselves. We're not able to get justice through the actual system itself because the system is that corrupt. But by getting people to shine light on this and publicly expose the bad deeds at scale, that is the only thing that can actually potentially slow down what is otherwise a government that is growing out of control and becoming more and more tyrannical every day. And as one example to that, there's only one group I know of that's been effective in terms of actually stopping the IRS. And it's not a group that's, I don't agree with the group and what the group's practices, but the Church of Scientology absolutely crushed the IRS. So the Church of Scientology, if you look at what the requirements are to be a church, the Church of Scientology does not fit the bill at all. It's a real estate holding company, and they require people that go through their programs to pay all of this money for these training materials. Like, for a whole variety of reasons, it doesn't check the box of how you should operate a religious entity that's a non-for-profit. Like any other, if I ran a non-for-profit and had the revenue streams that they had, it would be not deemed a 501c3. The contributions would not be tax deductible. What the Church of Scientology did was they employed a distributed group of essentially private investigators to go and hound individual IRS agents across the country, digging into their past and exposing whatever they could find about IRS agents across the country that were examining them. And then they leveraged that information to get the IRS off their back. That's literally what happened. You can Google this. It's fascinating. So Scientology is a horrible group, and they do some things to people that are not okay. I mean, there's been a number of documentaries and so forth about that, but they were able to stop the IRS. I think we just need to shine the light on, and I'm not saying harass IRS agents, but I'm saying we need to shine the light on all of the federal departments and bring to light all of the practices that are going on. And that's the only way to, again, slow down the deep state is through that. You're not going to do it through a lawsuit, and you're not going to do it through formal channels because they control all of that. So, I mean, that's the high level output, but I've completely transformed my life. And again, at the basis of it from a health perspective is doing the opposite of what we've been told. And you'll find that's usually the case with most things. We buy into a number of shared beliefs that when you actually unpack them and you say, well, why does this work like this? Why does this work like this? You're like, wow, I can't believe we all believe this. I mean, I guess it's kind of like, they teach you about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy early so that you'll accept the Federal Reserve and public health and everything else when you get older. And it works, right? Because then when you unpack it, it's like, wow, I can't believe I fell for that. You first go through the stage of, wow, I really fell for this. I believed in this. I believed in this fiat currency. I believed in that public health is trying to actually help me and improve my health. And no, it's not the case at all.
Yeah, and your whole point about public education system, the very premise is that there is one authority figure at the front of the room who knows the truth, and everyone has to obey the truth and repeat it back. And if you do, you get these fiat tokens, grades, that they just make up out of thin air to reinforce their version of the truth. So regardless of what the specific version of truth is, there's a situation in which the authority figure knows the truth, regardless of the agenda or whatever. But it's just that conditions people to just accept what authority figures are saying when it comes to, things in our adult life, IRS, Federal Reserve, that kind of thing, COVID, masks, vaccines, all of it.
Yeah, no, conditioning, appeal to authority, that's exactly what it is. And then on top of that, you have what it is that they are trying to get people to believe. I mean, my kids are in a Montessori school. They're actually in a private school. And then I had to deal with microaggressions, and this stuff came up in a Montessori school, and I'm kind of like, why is this has nothing to do with the Montessori curriculum. So then of course I asked them questions, and then I'm digging into, where did this curriculum even come from? And it turns out all of this stuff, even the stuff around identity and gender and diversity and inclusion, the way that it's being implemented, it has ties to Soros and a handful of large groups that are actually pushing an explicit agenda. And I think that there's been an agenda for a number of decades to separate children from parents, and to separate even the concept of gender. And I think this is actually part of a more ominous globalist plan. And I think that there really has been an intentional Marxist indoctrination. I mean, there's an interesting book about China and their 100-year plan, or if you listen to Yuri Brezhnev, or what, I think I misspelled his name, but Russia and China have both had plans to promote the idea of America destroying itself within, culturally, and through the educational system, and through the corruption of politics, business, and everything else. And boy, is that working. I mean, we are truly in a state of absolute decay. I mean, I don't think anybody would deny that at this point. I mean, it's really hard to look at any institution within this country right now and say that it has any integrity at all. So we're in for tough times. When I started the campaign, I actually thought we have 12 to 36 months to stop this. I now actually think we have less time. I didn't think we would have the accelerated timetable that we have, for instance, with CBDC. I mean, they rolled out a pilot through the New York Fed in December. They have this Fed Now thing coming in July. We already have Executive Order 14067 out of Biden promoting a central bank digital currency. So we are now on a fast track. So the problem is that when you talk to people that are unaware about any of this going on, the first thing they'll say is, this is an episode of Black Mirror. This can never happen. They can't implement it. And then the next thing that you say is, if you're like, well, they implemented already in China, they're like, well, they'd never do something like that here. And of course, people don't understand how far advanced the CBD social credit system is in China, and how many pilots are going on in different countries all over the world. There are 200 million security cameras in China. They have credit score systems. They're piloting them on a province by province basis. So they have different systems that they're trying with different rules and everything else. But there are something like 23 million people in China that are on a blacklist, meaning their social credit score is so low, they already have restricted access to healthcare options, transportation, housing, food, access to the internet. This is live now. And with 200 million surveillance cameras, they're measuring if you went to the grocery store and you put 2 bottles of beer into the shopping cart instead of 1, even though you ended up only buying 1, you get penalized for that. They're doing a level of tracking that is unbelievable in terms of data collection and everything else, and Face ID everywhere. There are subdivisions that you can't get out of the subdivision on a scooter without having your face scanned. So that is already in place. And if you look at the UN and the WEF, their situation is they look at these different countries as running a whole bunch of trials, and then based on how the trials work, they want to roll these programs out to different countries. One example of this is the MAID program, which is essentially the assisted dying program in Canada. I don't know if you've heard about this, but in Canada, 10,000 people were euthanized by the government last year. And what's happened is, now there are different positions you could take. You could take the position of, hey, listen, if I've got terminal cancer or whatever, maybe I'd like to make the decision to not be in complete pain for an extended period of time, right? So there's that whole argument about, well, is this necessarily a bad thing? That's not what's happening. And everybody automatically then gets concerned about, well, this is a slippery slope. Where could this go? And it's already getting to the point where, because of the COVID policies and because rent and housing is so expensive in Canada, there are people in Canada that are opting for the euthanasia program because they're in poverty, because of the programs put in place as the reaction to COVID by the government. And they've now expanded the program to go to include people with mental disabilities. So what was 10,000 people last year is now being expanded. It's being expanded to include veterans. There was an example of a story of somebody in their 20s who had depression and was upset about the fact that they couldn't find a boyfriend or a girlfriend. I can't remember what the story was. And the Canadian government came in and offered euthanasia as an actual option. Now, this Canadian-made program was developed by the World Health Organization, and the World Health Organization has stated that they intend, or excuse me, the UN, and the UN has stated they want, based on the results of the Canadian program, to start rolling this out to other countries. So this gets Black Mirror really fast. But I got on this theme by saying people aren't aware that this stuff is already in existence now. All of this technology exists. The social credit scores exist. The surveillance systems exist. The tracking exists. All of these other types of programs that you could hang off of a social credit system are being piloted in different places with an intent by a central organization of having it rolled out on more of a global basis. So that's just, to me, that's frightening. So first we have to make people aware that this exists now, and then we have to make them aware that yes, this could be implemented in the United States. Well, how do I know it could be implemented in the United States? I live in the United States. We had stay-at-home orders, business shutdowns, mask mandates, and people, depending upon your industry, if you were a federal government employee, an actual mandate to take a vaccine or you would lose your job. So we've already seen this, a shortened version of this Black Mirror tyranny in the United States. And they used that particular crisis to put in place more contact tracing, to put in more surveillance cameras here, to do things like with the banking system. We got rid of fractional reserve banking during the COVID crisis, and they never brought it back. So it used to be a bank would have to have 10% reserves on deposit. Now it's zero. It's a complete degenerate Ponzi is what the United States dollar is at this point. And so now I'm thinking, well, I thought historically, I've been early before. I'm usually right, but I'm often early. And now I'm kind of like, I don't even think I'm early with respect to shouting at the top of my lungs, we have to stop CBDC because it could be here. This isn't about protecting your kids. This is about protecting next year. So I'm trying to figure out how to get that word out as quickly as possible. And this financial crisis that we have right now, this is the time. This is it. And I didn't think we'd have this financial collapse this quickly. Congress is not going to fix this. Congress will never stop CBDC. I see people on Twitter, oh, we're going to have all these lobbyists come in and we're going to put a lot of money. We're going to take this Bitcoin money and we're going to get people elected to Congress. Well, first of all, they said that for the 2022 cycle and accomplished zero. And obviously we see what's going on with the regulatory environment. But on top of that, you have to take a step back and say to yourself, what is Congress? Congress's whole big deal is the power of the purse, right? That's what makes Congress Congress. Well, what is the power of the purse? The power of the purse is issuing IOUs to the Federal Reserve. Crypto is an existential threat to the power of the purse of Congress. So why would you think that Congress would vote for legislation that would put at jeopardy and make an existential threat the cornerstone of what that organization is all about? So we're never going to get so. And I look, I know people like Caitlin Long. She's working on our Custodia Bank and everything else. It's never going to happen. The Federal Reserve does not want a crypto bank. It is a threat. So they'll just shut it down. However, they need to shut it down, just like the SEC will pick something like Library. Look, there are a lot of scams. There are a lot of projects. And I think I probably talked about this 2 years ago when I explained why I was in Ravencoin, which is, yeah, most of the tokens, most of the coins, probably 95% of the top 100 coins are illegal securities. I mean, just straight up understanding what the law is. They raised money without registering with the SEC, or their proof of stake, or whatever it happens to be. I don't agree with the SEC. I think we should abolish the SEC, but at the same time, I understand that it exists, and I've read the laws, and yeah, pretty much most of this stuff is very clearly a violation. But they picked LBRY because LBRY, if anything, was an edge case where it probably isn't a security, or it's really a gray area, because people buy LBRY tokens so that they can use the LBRY platform. You buy the tokens so that you can post content or post reviews or do whatever you're going to do. That's in my opinion, a utility token. If anything, that's more of a utility token than a security token. But they picked that one example because with one lawsuit, they were able to kill a company that was offering a decentralized free speech alternative to YouTube at a time when, as we now know, the DHS, CDC, and FBI have been coordinating with big tech to censor us on everything. And so they kill that, and then they set a bar that's going to make it so that they can pretty much shut down almost all of the crypto projects. So, and they've won that lawsuit. So now here we are. So this is like the call to action. If people, and they're bank runs, and I've been talking about bank. If you followed me, I've actually been, I probably have used the bank run hashtag over the last 4 years more than anyone on Twitter. I'm sure that'll get me into trouble at some point. But what I've been saying is not go and take your money out of the bank. Or what a lot of people are doing is don't go to your small and regional bank and then take the money out and go give it to Chase or a large bank. That's the last thing you want to do. That will cause CBDC to happen sooner, because you're going to have more consolidation. And in fact, those big banks are probably the ones that own the Federal Reserve anyway. So that's going to make it a lot easier for them to just push the smaller players out and then, be a very tight cabal in terms of the rollout of CBDC. But it's also not to pull the cash out and put it in your mattress. It's to convert fiat to a self-custody alternative so that you're not stuck in this tyrannical control system with CBDC and social credit scores. So buy self-custody crypto, buy self-custody gold, buy self-custody silver. Get out of the system. Don't fight the system, exit the system. Because the system is rigged against us. We're not, again, going to beat the system at its own at their own rules. I mean, and it clearly hasn't happened, and the prognosis is not great, right? I mean, they're even trying to crack down now, saying proof of work miners are violating securities laws. So they're attacking this from every angle. And obviously, I think with the Signature Bank shutdown, that wasn't even a bank that looks like was having financial problems. They shut that down because it was an on and off ramp for crypto. And so, well, why would they be doing that? Well, they know we're looking at a collapse. There are meetings there. You can actually see videos of FDIC meetings where they're actually sitting around talking about the fact that they know the financial system isn't secure, but it's important that the public think it is secure. I mean, you can see the actual live footage, recorded footage from FDIC meetings. They know the system isn't stable, but they need people to believe in it long enough to put the infrastructure in place for what they're going to do next, which we all know is CBDC. And it's not a theory, because we've got executive orders, laws, and technology being piloted in the United States. So this is so I'm urging as many people as possible. You ask, well, what can I do? I know what I've done is I've told everybody I know, and I tell everybody that I can, as often as I can, to get into crypto, gold, and silver. And then I'm launching this website probably in a month or so with easy to use tools and guides. I mean, to be honest, I want to make it so that a boomer can get self-custody crypto in their hands in 15 minutes. One challenge that I've had, I've introduced hundreds of people to crypto. And even though I've always said, not your keys, not your coins, get your stuff off of exchanges, 60-70% of the time, people still leave it on there anyway. And I know a lot of people that have lost crypto because they left it on an exchange, despite me saying, and I guess so then I'm like, did I not say it forcefully enough? Which is why periodically every other day I'm saying, not your keys, not your coins, get your stuff off of exchanges. Nothing is safe. Coinbase is not safe. Binance is not safe, right? I mean, Mt. Gox was the largest exchange. It failed. FTX failed. Coinbase lost $2.65 billion last year and is now being investigated by the SEC. If you think that's a bullish prospect for, a third party to be a custodian of your money and your digital assets, you might want to rethink that and really examine whether Coinbase is safe. So Coinbase has lost something like 600,000 Ethereum over the years through various hacks, exploits, and other related issues with, fork splits and everything else. I saw that the other day as well. So no exchange is safe. And it's tough because, I also know a lot of people that have lost crypto bringing it into their own possession. And, they didn't write down their phrase or whatever, or store it, and their computer broke or whatever it happened to be. So we have to teach people to become self-reliant and to take this stuff seriously and to pay attention to it. That's what we need. But we need that now, like on a mass scale, because this is the leverage point that we have. The banking system is absolutely collapsing. $1 trillion has been taken out of small and regional banks in the last few weeks. $1 trillion. Banks are missing and can't find $100 billion or $200 billion. I saw an article about that yesterday. You are witnessing a cascading collapse. When the FDIC and Treasury holds an emergency meeting, and then they come out and they issue a statement that says the banking system is safe and stable, that tells you the banking system is not safe and stable. You don't have an emergency meeting for the purpose of everything was okay. We just needed to get together and understand from each other that it's okay before we put out a press release. There is a massive collapse coming, and it's coming because every asset class and debt class is in a bubble. Every single one. Auto loans peak relative to 2008, mortgages, auto loans, student loans, credit card debt, business debt, commercial real estate. It's all a bubble, and it's all about to pop. Commercial real estate is about to get devastated, and people don't understand how life insurance companies, health insurance companies, the banks, they don't just sit in cash. They put all of their money into these various asset classes. All of the asset classes are deteriorating. So you can have an implosion that happens within 48 hours, just like we saw in 2008, except all of the bubbles are bigger this time. And you have a sovereign debt crisis on top of that as well. So we have our own, I was looking back at an article that I wrote, like, I don't know, 8 years ago. I didn't even remember the time period now, but I was complaining that the national debt was $18 trillion. And it was only a few years ago. It's like $33 trillion now. We have $175 trillion of unfunded liabilities. Like, it's a black hole. And we've taken no constructive steps to get out of it. All we did was print 40% of the dollars that have ever been in existence in the year 2020, right? And if you think about it, fiat is a Ponzi. I mean, it absolutely is a Ponzi. The government issues these IOUs to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve uses these IOUs, kind of deposits these IOUs in banks that then get to create $9 out of thin air for every dollar worth of IOU that they have. So then they'll loan you $500,000 based on, 1/9 of that in reserves in the form of an IOU, but then they've never printed the interest. So now at some point you've got to pay back that principal with interest. That interest hasn't been printed yet. So unless there is more spending and more IOUs being generated by the federal government, there's not enough money in supply for people to pay back the principal and the interest on all of their loans. Well, the Federal Reserve knows that. That's why they raise interest rates, so that they can go in and basically foreclose on people's physical assets. That's essentially what the model is. It has nothing to do with unemployment. It has nothing to do with inflation. If you described a DeFi Ponzi like that, everybody would get all upset. I mean, even if you explained it, people don't realize that fiat is worse than FTX. Fiat is worse than any of the scams that we've seen with DeFi. The DeFi people aren't devious enough relative to the Federal Reserve. And I'm going into the book. I'm trying not to go into too much detail on that aspect of it, because there are other ways to explain why it's a Ponzi and why it's unraveling. And you can show that the purchasing power of the dollar has decreased by 97% since 1913. And they do it in a way where they've trained us to be accustomed to 2 to 3% inflation per year as being normal. We've just gotten used to that. Oh, okay, well, it's just 2 to 3%. Well, I'm not going to think about it. I don't notice that much year from year. But that adds up over 2 generations, 3 generations, to the point where you used to be able to have a family in the 1950s, on average, had 3.3 kids, one person working at home, or I mean, one family member working, mothers usually staying at home, and owned a house, owned a car, and the kids could go to college off of one income. Now, 2 to 3% over 3 generations, and now half of marriages end in divorce. Both parents have to work, and we're having fewer kids, which is in part for a variety of factors, not the least of which is the poisoning of the food. But that's how inflation rears its head over a longer timescale. So that 97% reduction in purchasing power is real, and it's a real problem. And now it's even accelerating further. So I mean, you know, we only have a small percentage to go left to go until we get to zero. But people don't know this. People aren't aware of any of this. They don't understand where money comes from. They don't understand that it's not backed. Some people still think it's backed by gold or silver. They don't realize that ended in 1971. So like we are debasing our currency at an epic pace right now. So if people get out now and get into these alternatives, now is the time to do it, because they're clearly going to shut off all the on-ramps and off-ramps. And then the important part beyond that is we need to start using crypto for peer-to-peer transactions. It's not enough to just have it. It's not enough to have digital. Digital gold is a useless concept. It's not useless, but it's not going to solve the situation of when the financial system implodes and we need to buy and sell things from one another on a daily basis. Having digital gold doesn't help in the same way that having gold bars isn't helpful for day-to-day commerce. I mean, the original white paper for Bitcoin talked about peer-to-peer electronic cash, and we need that. And unfortunately, we don't have that. I mean, I looked this up the other day. I think the peak transaction volume was still December 2017. And if we had that peak amount right now, we'd still have the same problems that we had in 2017. I mean, I remember in 2017 when we were looking at 7-10 days for a transaction to actually be processed, and the transaction fees, that would happen. If everything collapsed, that's what would happen. That would happen again, because Lightning is not implemented broadly for day-to-day transactions. So unfortunately, we're not ready, or at least BTC is not ready for prime time. And we should be like laser focused on how do we get people out of fiat, and then how do we get people to start using this? Because I think most people, clearly based on their behavior, view crypto as something that they speculate on, hoping that it goes up in value so that they can cash it out for fiat. That's obviously what most people are doing, based on how much is left on exchanges, based on the kinds of tokens and coins that people buy. So we're still at the very early stages of having to get people to understand that there's a revolution in money here. There's a revolutionary technology here that disintermediates the middleman, and we've got to get it going like ASAP. I don't know how to scream it any louder, but I'm going to put out these books, put out all this material, and hopefully it can gain traction. And it is. I mean, I can tell you, I don't know about from your experience, but people that I know that thought I was nuts 12 months ago are taking their money out of the bank. I'm getting more people calling, asking about technically where should they go, which gold, which silver, which crypto, as opposed to, what are you, nuts? The dollar's always been strong. Nothing will ever happen to the dollar. But are you seeing a change in behavior?
Oh yeah, big time, big time. And one of the biggest signals is my mom. So she actually works at a bank, and she has, you know, most of her career, which has always been this source of tension for me. I'm like, Mom, you're like, you know, you're contributing to an evil system. But she's like, oh no, it's not evil. And I think she's starting to get it now. So some of the things I've been predicting for a few years are happening. You know, all these like collapses and so forth. So she says to me, Alan, you were right. You know, this such and such happened. So yeah, it's happening with other people too. But to your point, I think in general, most people still look at Bitcoin as a speculative gamble They have no idea that it represents a way of opting out of the system, that it's a values system, like ethics. Like, where are you going to put your energy in the world? What are you going to support? What systems do you believe in? The switch hasn't flipped in their brain that all of that stuff is in their control, that they can opt out, they can contribute to something they believe in. But it's happening soon. It's going to be happening very soon, because people are going to have to ask these questions about their money, their healthcare, their work, their freedom, everything. So yeah, it's coming quick.
Well, and I'm advising people, to the extent that they can, try to figure out how to get off of prescription drugs, because you don't need most of them. It's not true for all of them, but it is true for most of them. And so because of where we are heading, I'm actually working on something right now. My wife and I are working on creating some like keto bars or whatever that have all of the nutrients in them. So factoring in good fats and cruciferous vegetables in powder form or whatever, and trying to make something that's just kind of like, all right, I could have 2 or 3 of these a day and that's it. I get all my nutritional requirements, just as kind of a safeguard. Because you need completely different food. Like, you actually primarily need fat for fuel, which most is completely the opposite of what we've been taught. So you can actually stock up on fat and have a fuel source for an extended period of time once your body becomes fat adapted. There's a lot to try to teach people. But yeah, we are at that point now, though, because they're closing the off and on ramps. We've got to get people, like, how do you go through this process of, there's a steep learning curve, but there's no time, right? Like, that's the real challenge, right? Now it's kind of like, all right, the train's coming. It's kind of like, I'm going to shout this, because normally it would be like, I'd like to introduce you to this concept. You're going to work your way into it on your own terms, do your own research over your own period of time, get to it. But it's kind of like, no, if you don't do this, maybe in the next 90 days, you're going to be completely shut off from this alternative, right? That's where we're at. So I'm hoping. It does bother me to see that people are transferring their money from regional banks to, Citi and Wells Fargo and Bank of America. That's kind of not the point. I was kind of hoping this Trump thing, I was kind of pushing this idea, and other people were, that, oh, if Trump gets arrested, the right form of protest would be a bank run. And that actually started to get a little bit of traction. This guy, Jack Posobiec, who has like 2 million followers, actually tweeted that. And so Kim.com is tweeting it. So the whole bank run concept is actually getting a lot of attention now. And now that Elon Musk owns Twitter, I think that term was suppressed based on my experience in the past, but that's completely changed. There's been no censorship that I can tell around the bank run topic, but it's not a bank run in the sense of, the bank isn't the problem. It's fiat currency that's the problem. So it's not that your bank is failing and you just have to find a safer bank. The whole thing has failed and you got to opt out of that system. And it's tough. And it is tough when there's Bitcoin and Ravencoin and like a handful of other proof of work coins. And then there's 99% of everything else, which isn't any better than fiat. And the truth is, when you have the Sam Bankman-Frieds of the world, and you have Luna, and you have Gemini and every other scam, it's, looking at it from the outside, if you aren't immersed in it and you haven't like researched the technical details and everything else, it looks like a scam, right? And of course the media will do its part to prop up crypto bad, fiat good. And so that's a challenge. I mean, it's legitimately a challenge. And I want to make sure with the site that I put up, it's going to be a community driven site, but I also want to make sure people can't post scams. Like, I don't want people, like, if we're going to have, like, here are some wallets that you can use, I don't want people submitting their own wallets and then we find out everybody's getting rugged. So there's always a balance there. But man, I'm saying the next 90 days, this is our big shot, because we have a lot of leverage too, in terms of, since the banks are no longer operating on fractional reserves, then the actual amount that it takes to cause distress for a bank is significantly lower, right? I mean, I know people, if you want to take $10,000 out of the bank, you've got to schedule an appointment 48 hours from now. You can't just go into the bank and take your money out. And I think once people start realizing that banks have very little actual cash on hand, you could get 3 of your buddies together and go try to take the money out of your account. You'll find they actually can't do it. And then they'll give you a runaround. You'll have to schedule an appointment. Anything over $10,000, you've got to fill out a form and all this other stuff. But I don't think people are aware of exactly how bad this Ponzi has gotten, especially coming off of COVID. So then the question is, knowing fiat's a Ponzi, what are you going to do to pay off the last round of the Ponzi, knowing that you printed 40% of the dollars ever in existence last time? You need an excuse. You need a justification that is larger in scale and scope than COVID. And most people are not going to accept a, Great Society or New Deal style spending program, because they'll look at the debt and the deficit and everything and say, well, we're not going to do that. So they need some kind of emergency again, which is probably going to be war, which is the go-to for these kinds of things. And so this is what's going on with Ukraine and Russia. We should not be involved in that at all. This is a disastrous situation, and we seem to be doing everything that we can to not have negotiations, to not sit down and try to find a diplomatic solution. We seem to be doing everything that we can to foment more conflict. And I believe that's by design. I think that we want that. And so now we've got conflict. We've got China and Taiwan. We've got Ukraine and Russia. We've got what's going on with Syria and Iran. I mean, it's a multiple front situation. And honestly, if you take a step back, a lot of the root cause is the United States. It's been our own policy, and it's been our own handling of the dollar. I mean, let's face it, the debasing of our currency, it is the global reserve currency, and the way that we have kind of printed with no end since we went off the gold standard, that's creating a lot of these issues. So if we wanted to fix some of these issues, no one's ever thought, well, hey, maybe we should have sound money. No, far easier to launch a military conflict and blame China. Now, I'm not saying China's great. China does want to destroy the United States, but without firing a bullet. And again, they're doing a good job at that. But this goes back to, if we want to fix the country, we have to fix ourselves. And this is where the transformation aspect comes into it. But we have tools now. We do have decentralized tools. We do have access to information. We do have the ability to take our health largely into our own hands. It's just a matter of whether we recognize it and do it. Now, AI is a whole other fun topic, but
boy, yeah. Let's not open that rabbit hole just yet. So wait,
yeah.
I'm curious. So for people who want to check out your books, you said they're coming out soon and they're kind of staggered. So what's kind of the timeline and the release schedule, and where can they find them? Like on your website?
Yeah, I'll link to it on my website, which is day2024.com. And then also on my Twitter, which is aaronrday.com, or at aaronrday. I'll have links to it. The first book should be out within 2 to 3 weeks. And then I'm working on the other ones kind of in parallel. So I want to get them all out within kind of 4 months. I want to get them out literally as soon as possible, but I had to focus on the sound money part of it first, because I do think that the CBDC thing is the big issue. So from a political campaigning thing, I'm not paying attention to, I don't care about getting into the news cycle and commenting on what's going on a day-to-day basis. I understand that there's a globalist movement towards the centralization of money, power, and information, and that at the core of that is CBDC, and that we have to stop that first. So that's what I'm going to be talking about first, and then we're going to launch into these other things. Now, obviously, the medical tyranny thing is turning out to be, well, whatever. I'm sure when we talked 2 years ago, we were talking about, I didn't get vaccinated, and I was looking at this whole thing like, wow, what is this? But now I don't know how much it's getting out to the mainstream, but certainly on Twitter, and if you look at the Rand Paul hearings and everything else, and you look at the life insurance data that's coming in for all-cause mortality, it's very clear this was not a good situation. They never should have pushed the vaccines. And again, I'm going back to my view that public health is not here to improve our health. It's here to push a eugenics agenda. And I think the vaccines were part of it. And it looks like the data is starting to bear that out. So at least people aren't getting the boosters anymore, but we have to look at what's behind this. I don't want Fauci to be the scapegoat, and then they put somebody else in there who's controlled by the same people. And then the next time we get another manufactured crisis by a new management. and then fall for it again. So there needs to be a deeper unwinding. I don't know if you've read The Real Anthony Fauci by RFK Jr. It's a phenomenal book and a movie. And it's just, it's filled with source information and links. Like it's very, very thoroughly researched. And it goes into the fact that they've been manufacturing these crises for a long time, including AIDS. AIDS is just basically made up. They basically just put 22 different conditions and labeled it one thing. And in fact, at the time, HIV, there were, in the data set of deaths, there were 5,000 people that died from AIDS that didn't have HIV, and Fauci had the data expunged. Yeah, no, this is crazy stuff, but like literally the research is there on all of it. And it's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's got a pretty good reputation for being thorough in his research. This has been stated by other sources for a long time, and it's been in the realm of conspiracy theory. And now like RFK Jr. is like, wait a minute, I actually looked into this. This is actually true. So there were several things lumped into AIDS, and but then the source was that we were led to believe that the source was HIV, and that wasn't the source. It's just when you take 22 conditions and lump them into one thing, it was just a convenient scapegoat. So there's public health has had an effect. And when I say public health, most of the people, doctors and nurses, have no idea what's going on. They're complying, they're following orders, right? They go to school, they get a certification, they're repeating back what they're told. And they think because they spent a lot of time in school learning to repeat a specific thing, that they're now experts in it and that they're doing the good thing and everybody should listen to them. Now, whether the people that are designing the curriculum are psychopaths that are hell-bent on depopulation or not, they don't know that, and they wouldn't know that unless that got revealed at some point. So this is one of those situations where you really can have a situation where you have professionals in an industry that think they're doing the right thing vehemently, and they're not. They're actually working. How do you convince somebody that they've spent 10 years on extra education and all of this other stuff, and that what they're doing is promoting an agenda that's against health? That's a tall order. You think, convincing people that fiat's a Ponzi is one thing. Trying to convince somebody that spent 15 years in school and residency and everything else that the stuff that they're pushing isn't making people healthier, that's a bit of a stretch. So that's the challenge. And there are some brave medical professionals that are speaking out, and most of them, as we're seeing, are getting their medical license taken away. They're being sued, they're being censored. We're at a really interesting point. But what we have to expose is the fact that these institutions are corrupt, and they're corrupt at the top, and that it's systemic. That's part of what I want to do with these tools. I'm hoping these crowdsourced tools, I hope people actually participate in exposing this stuff so that we can wake up as many people as possible to just stop believing in authority and start thinking for yourself. If the more people we get doing that, the better shot we've got. But honestly, after the compliance rate from COVID, it makes me a little bit nervous. So how do we think people are actually going to behave? They're waking up a little bit now, but if you throw a manufactured crisis that attacks the energy grid, do we think that people will be fearful and then say, oh yeah, we need a Cyber Patriot Act to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and then strip away more of our rights with respect to censorship and everything else? Do you think they'd be likely to fall for that? I mean, I think probably yes. Where we are today, we have to wake up more people faster. So I just hope Twitter remains online and Elon remains, alive and well for, as long as possible, but at least long enough to get information out, because Twitter's been a completely different place for the last few months. So
yeah, for sure. Wow, so many threads to pull on there. But yeah, I think about compliance and the next wave of mandates that come through and how people just follow them and so forth, and how bad it was during COVID, in the sense that so many people followed things unquestioningly, in my opinion. But yeah, I'm reminded of this quote from Tommy Lee Jones in one of his movies. I forget what movie it was, but he said, "A person is smart, people are stupid." And it's just like, yeah, when we get in these groups, like on a societal level, if we know that, society is whatever, everyone's standing 6 feet apart, okay, I'll do that too. because it's like there's this like thing where we don't want to like ostracize ourselves and like isolate ourselves from the group. And it's this weird phenomenon where the people in charge can basically say something ridiculous. And if people think that other people are complying, then they themselves will comply, even though in private they're like, that rule is stupid.
Yep.
So that's what I saw during COVID. A lot of people who behind closed doors would say to me, masks are stupid. I know they don't work, but I always wear one when I go out in public. That's what people would say to me. So I don't know. I'm worried we're going to get plenty more stuff like that because it seems like it's a part of human nature. It's not so much like anything else. What do you think?
Well, is it part of human nature, or is it something that's drilled into us? Obviously from the time we're 0 to 7, our brains are at the alpha state. So anything that's shoved into us, we don't have any conscious awareness of. So that's how we get these limiting self-beliefs. Well, then we go from that phase to indoctrination centers through schools, which have a definitive social agenda. Then we get out of school, and depending upon what our profession is, we have whatever corporations, media, sports and entertainment, and everything else. So we have all of these sources. I don't necessarily think that there's anything inherent in human nature. I think it's been engineered this way. I think you can actually, now, how do you deprogram from this? That's a separate conversation. That's a lot of work to do that. And I mean, I've done some of this stuff. I actually gotten into meditation, and I can't remember if we talked about this before, but Dr. Joe Dispenza has some interesting stuff. And then I did Tom Campbell and some of the Monroe Institute stuff, and have really gotten into meditation, but not in the just mindfulness, calm app type of thing, but kind of you can get your brain into, you can reprogram yourself. So you can actually get your brain into that alpha state, and you can override those programs that were drilled into your subconscious. And you can actually get to the point. So if you think about it, and this actually relates to the third book that I'm doing, the part about mainstream media. Mainstream media is clearly programming. I mean, they call it television programming for a reason, but we know now, because of the Church Commission and because of some of the information that Twitter Files has put out there, we know that the FBI and the CIA have plants working at mainstream media, and they plant stories. They actually push propaganda through big media in the United States. Now, when you're watching TV in the morning or at night, your brain slips into that alpha brain state again. So you're sitting there, you're kind of like dozing off, you're watching TV, and a big pharma ad comes on, making you fearful about some condition that may or may not exist. You're not consciously filtering that out. So now all of a sudden something's in your subconscious about, oh, I got to worry about this type of foot fungus, or I've got to worry about whatever else it is that they're selling. So turning off TV is, I haven't had cable for 8, 9, I don't even know how long it is now, but I haven't had TV for a long period of time. But that is a huge thing that people can do, because they are still being programmed depending upon what their brain state is. But then you can develop your own programming. You could say, well, what do I want my life to be like? And so we actually work on these things. I learned this through Dr. Joe, but I've kind of ramped it up a little bit. Create your own video of what you want your own life to be. You can you can listen to what are called binaural beats, which basically will get your brain into a certain state, and then you can program yourself. You can reprogram yourself. So this is a way you can actually get at whatever limiting beliefs you may have about yourself. So I'm saying this in a way to say that you can overwrite the programming that you have been given. And I think when you do overwrite that programming, when people strip away their beliefs, which frankly, all of them are limiting, but if you strip away your beliefs, then you're at a state where you're open to infinite possibilities. Whereas otherwise you're programmed, and to you, what's possible mentally is constrained by the first 7 years of your life and all of these external influences from these outside organizations and entities that are driving an agenda. So now, again, that's a tall order. How do you do that at scale? How do you do that quickly? I don't know, but it is possible. So that's a long answer to your question of, do I think it's human nature? I don't think it's human nature, but I think that there's a lot of work to be done to get at that core, to be able to deprogram that, if you will.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, one other thing I was thinking about is, well, I guess it's really the question that I sort of asked very early in our conversation, which is, what can any one person do? And you've answered that question pretty well. I mean, you could opt out of all these different things, reprogram yourself, etc. And a related question I have is sort of what percentage of the population is the critical mass to cause like a meaningful shift in the way society operates as a whole? And this is sort of coming from a stat that I heard, which I was not able to fact check, but it was about the American Revolution.
3%.
What's it, 3%?
Yeah, is that where you're going?
I was going to go, I've heard different numbers. The point is, yeah, 3%, 10%, 5%, like really small numbers, which are surprising. Every single number is a surprisingly small number because like the perception is like, oh, the tipping point is 50% or 51% when most people want a revolution. That's when the revolution happens. But surprisingly, a really small percentage of people can lead the charge. Not that I'm advocating like a war with guns, but just any kind of revolution, peaceful revolution, whatever. So yeah, what do you think about all that?
I think that that's probably true. I've heard that 3% figure before, and that, it's not that everybody in America was gung ho about the Revolutionary War. It was a small percentage of people that were motivating it. So if people are influenced by mainstream media and everything else, they could equally be influenced by some other motive force. And so, yeah, so if you had a group of 3% people that were really intensely focused and putting their energy in a way, then I think that'll work. And I think that's similar to what was it, Jeffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, even kind of it's how startups work. It's kind of like you have to get your early adopters. And then once you get your early adopters, it moves to the next phase. And then you have to kind of cross the chasm before you get to mainstream adoption, right? Ideas never just immediately take off with the mainstream. It always goes through a cycle of early adopters. And then, they're like 4 or 5 different stages. And actually I was pulling up a quote, which I use often. It's, when an audience is presented with a theory that is 1 level above their understanding, they find it inspiring. When the information is 2 levels above their comprehension, they fall asleep. At 3 levels, they become angry. And when the data reaches 4 levels above the level of the audience, they want to kill the presenter. And this is from a guy named Dr. Charles Tart, who actually has worked on a lot of this interesting research on meditation and psychological phenomenon and everything else. But I think that kind of encapsulates what we're talking about here as well. For most people, most of what I'm talking about, at least if you go to my campaign website and you look at what I'm talking about, most people are going to be like, you're nuts. But I'm trying to target I'm trying to get the 3%, but we have to get them quickly, right? We got to get the 3%, and the 3% need to mushroom out to the next rung, and we've got to do it quickly because we're dealing with a compressed time frame. But yeah, I do believe that it's definitely a smaller percent. It's not, you'll never mass market the ideas that we're talking about in terms of this centralization versus decentralization thing. I boiled down my campaign to this is all about decentralization versus centralization, free will versus determinism, and love versus fear. Those are really the dimensions of the entire thing. Now, of course, everything that we're talking about, all of these ideas were embedded in the Constitution. It's not like the stuff that we're talking about is actually should be foreign. The fact that what we talk about is foreign, and that we have to talk about it in terms of, can we address and find 3% early adopters? That's the more bizarre part about all of this to me. But I was horrified with, with my kids. I know going to my kids' dance recital in New Hampshire in the snow, or well, not snow, but there's snow on the ground outdoors in 2020. They're wearing masks. Like it was ridiculous. Like they do the Nutcracker. They couldn't do the Nutcracker. So they're doing this other thing. I'm like, this whole thing is absurd. We'll talk about theater. And I look at this just for my kids have definitively less freedom. So if I put myself back in their shoes, if I go back to when I'm 12 and I think about what the universe looked like when I was 12 versus what they're dealing with on multiple levels, even just at the level of having to go to an airport. I remember going to an airport 30 minutes before the flight took off, before we had all of the 9/11 stuff. The mask mandates, all of it. My daughter started a business when she was 10 selling slime. She would make these like custom slimes And I was like, wow, this is weird. And she would go onto TikTok, and she was actually selling a bunch of them. It turned into like, became a difficult project to manage. But she's like, she wanted to branch out and get into some other areas. She's like, well, could I get into like cosmetics, or could I get into these? And then it's like, oh, here's the FDA approval process for this. Here's this, here's this. So started to teach her about all of the limitations of, if you're trying to sell food, all of the restrictions that are put on things, even starting a business. And what the SEC is doing with crypto is one thing, but it's even hard to raise angel money now, because it used to be you could raise angel money, and if somebody said they were an accredited investor, then they could invest, right? Now they have to prove they're an accredited investor and actually provide financial statements and everything else. And so they've increased the barrier. They've made it so that only wealthy people can invest in startups. I mean, on a larger scale, and which means that you have to be accredited based on what the IRS says is accredited, which you may not want all of your assets to be known or documented, right? It's just so the barriers to doing anything on a peer-to-peer basis are constrained, not just in crypto, and everything is to the benefit of large corporations. The whole COVID situation, all of those PPP funds went disproportionately to large businesses. If you were a nail salon or a barbershop or a small business or somebody that operated largely in cash or whatever, who actually needed the funding, you didn't get it, but Amazon did, law firms did, multi-billion-dollar companies did. So that helped consolidate more and more power, which is part of the globalist agenda, because they want large corporations fitting into an overall structure that can meet compliance costs with climate change, metrics that are fabricated and everything else. So again, it's all a big move to centralization. So I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but it is worrisome, because again, just having a slime business, it's like, okay, well, then I thought, well, we're using Ravencoin, and Ravencoin's all about security tokens. So let's go raise money. Let's go raise $25,000 from a bunch of people. Well, then you investigate that's $25,000 in legal fees just to do that. And then in order to be able to they created this regulation CF crowdfunding rules. So there are rules where you can register and you can raise larger amounts of money from the public. Where you can have a larger number of investors. It used to be that if you had 300 investors, you were a de facto publicly traded company and actually had to go through all of like the audited financial statements and all of the reporting stuff. So you really couldn't crowdsource anything with more than 300 people. They changed those regulations. But it turns out, in order to be able to do a Reg CF offering, you have to go through a broker dealer. So you have to go through a third party, a registered third party. Well, these registered third parties aren't going to do an offering for $50,000 where they make 7%. Somebody's not going to, because at some core level, the base level of due diligence and legal documentation and financial reporting is the same for a $50,000 offering as it is for a $5 million offering, which means that the acceptance rate for broker dealers to do a crowdfunding deal is less than the acceptance rate by venture capitalists investing in a startup. So here again, we have a situation where the SEC has come to the rescue to save absolutely no one and do nothing to actually democratize the fundraising process or fuel small business, once again by design, because their interest is protecting Wall Street, protecting the lawyers, and protecting the status quo, which is exactly what they're trying to do with crypto.
Yeah, it's crazy. And closing all the off ramps, it's like expanding the IRS agents. It's just everything is taking from the little guy and just giving it to the big guys.
Yep.
So yeah, so what you got to do is you got to opt out. You got to opt out, as you mentioned. So if people want to learn more, they can go to your website. They can follow you on Twitter. If they want to help your campaign, same place.
Same place. Day2024.com has you can sign up for our email list, and we're going to be organizing volunteers. Realistically, the election stuff doesn't happen for another 10 months. Nobody cares about what's going on with the election. My whole emphasis right now is getting this content out, getting the website out. And again, it's about organizing this mass non-compliance. So the most important thing you can do is help me share the information and like help share the information with your family and friends to take control of your own life. That's the number one, that's the thrust of the campaign. And we need to do that as quickly as possible. And I'm excited about this book. The books are not going to be long. They're intentionally designed to be kind of like, Thomas Paine, Common Sense. Like they're supposed to be short with action that you can take in them, but on these important topics. And so I've written the basis of the first book, but it's taking me more time to edit and to actually cut stuff out than anything else. So it's actually been, that's been an interesting part of the process, but hopefully these books and materials are helpful for people.
Fantastic. And you said you're looking for volunteers. Is it just spreading information, or what other kinds of volunteer roles are available?
Well, I'll be rolling that out, but these websites are going to be crowdsourced websites. So for instance, the first website I'm going to launch has two components to it. So every aspect of this is about truth and transformation. The truth part is about exposing the truth. The transformation part is about exiting the system and taking action. So with respect to the banks, we're going to have a censorship resistant site where people can basically crowdsource information about corruption within banks and bank runs. And then so that way we have a centralized place where people can go and actually see what's going on in real time with the financial system. And then there's going to be a separate section, which is going to have directories for wallets, point of sale systems, where you can get self-custody gold and silver with how-to guides. And then we're going to start building a merchant directory where you can go and use crypto, gold, and silver directly for commerce. So you can get involved by using the site and then contributing to the site in terms of if you have information about bank corruption, or a merchant, or you want to help spread the word about how people can get onboarded to self-custody alternative forms of currency. That's the most valuable thing people can do for now. There'll be other stuff later, but honestly, I'm not even thinking about that now. I'm just trying to get this stuff out right now about sound money. So
Amazing. I love it. I have one last question before I let you go, and it's
yep.
actually something you mentioned way earlier. Did you say that you went 38 days fasting, or what did you mean when you said you did a 38-day sprint fasting?
It was a 36-day sprint. I was shooting for 40, and I would have made it, except that my mouth was that smelled so bad and it was so dry that there were no diminishing. That was past the point of diminishing returns at that point. I couldn't sleep at that point, but it was actually okay. Like day 35 was fine. Then day 36 turned into a bit of an issue, but I didn't do it all at once. I didn't just say, oh, I'm going to do a 40-day fast. I started doing a 1-day fast, then a 2-day fast, then 3, then 5, then 7, then 10, then 14, right? So then I built up to it. So that over the course of a year, it was 128 days, and then it was 36 days in one stretch.
Wow, 36 days. But water only, or did you must have had something, no?
Water, no, I had no food. I occasionally I would have either electrolytes or salt. And so I've gotten pretty adapted to this, but again, you have to practice. I would not advise anybody to jump into doing something like this. There are some people that say you should only do water only. There are some people like Dave Asprey or whatever who will say you can do bulletproof coffee. It doesn't have to be water only. Mine was water only. And I will tell you, when you start studying fasting, this is the thing, because we were talking about healthcare. The most amazing thing that the medical system doesn't want you to know is if you leave your body alone, it will fix itself. I mean, there have been numerous examples of people that had stage 4 cancer that you fast for 21 days or longer, your body will flush out the bad cells. Like you can clear up skin, you can clear up all kinds of conditions. I've never been healthier than I am now. Like I had gluten issues. I had a whole bunch of other issues. And as I said, I haven't even had a cold. I now periodically will fast. So I just did a 3.5-day fast. It's not as easy now. I was going to do a 5-day fast. It's not as easy now, I guess, not after having lost the weight, but at 3 days, you basically reboot your immune system. So every season, as we go into a new season, I do a 3-day fast so I can reboot my immune system heading into that new kind of weather germ situation. I highly recommend people investigate learning about fasting in general and experimenting with it. And then I try to eat in a 6-hour window. So I'm fasting 18 hours a day anyway, usually, except now I'm trying to build muscle. So I've I've tweaked some of this a little bit. So 2 days a week, I'm not actually doing the intermittent fasting, because to build protein, you have to have enough protein coming in over an extended period of time. But intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting will change your life in really profound ways. That's why it's interesting when you talk about healthcare. So much of how you can improve yourself is by doing less. That's generally a good place to start, except with sleep. Hacking sleep is another important one. So, but book 2, that's book 2. And I'm going to put this stuff in a more organized fashion. Like right now, I haven't really thought through how to communicate this stuff in an effective, organized way, but I will, after this first book, because I really think people have no idea how much control they have over their own health. We have put so much reliance on big pharma and on the medical system. And again, you look at the treatments if you look at what happened with COVID in terms of putting people on ventilators, putting people on remdesivir, I mean, really, they dramatically decreased your odds of survival. Even if you had COVID or whatever, and you went to a hospital, your chances of success just went down, because they were pushing treatments that increased your mortality. So I don't know if people are fully aware of that yet, but man, it was not a good situation. So I avoid hospitals and doctors 100%.
Yeah,
So
I can relate. I just went to a hospital for the first time in like 10 years, and it was an absolutely terrible experience. I won't bother with the story or the details, but it was just terrible. I continued to lose the very little faith I had. So I got to just take care of myself now. But
yep.
that's life. So Aaron, thank you so much for being here. This was so great. I'll make sure to get all those links from you, put them in the description. Any parting words that you have for our audience?
No, just exit fiat as quickly as possible. That is the parting word. Get your money out of the bank and convert it to self-custody, crypto, gold, and silver as soon as you can, and tell everybody about it, because this is not a drill. This is an emergency situation. The financial system is crumbling, and you're not going to save everything. We're in for bad times no matter what, but you can at least have a little bit of a head start and some control over your own destiny. We're going to go through a period of despair. The question is, are you going to be able to withstand going through it and avoid tyranny at the other end? Because that is what's planned.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, Aaron.
Thank you.
Best of luck in your campaign. And if there's
Thank you
anything I
very
can do
much.
to help, just reach out.
All right, we'll do. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.